You were the first person to
Kyle.
be held in contempt by Colorado's Independent Ethics Commission. You refused a subpoena to testify. They ruled that you broke state ethics laws twice while you were governor. So, Mr. Hickenlooper, are you sorry for breaking the law, and do you regret how you behaved with the Ethics Commission?
Well, I appreciate the chance to be clear about this. As you know, these were allegations about trips I took while I was governor. I made a commitment to travel anywhere and everywhere to try and bring jobs and create economic growth for Colorado. And there's a dark money Republican group that filed 97 allegations against these travels. And the commission came back and found 2 of these violated ethics codes. One was a trip where I went to speak to a conference. I was told I paid all the expenses of the conference. Evidently, there was a sponsor who paid some of the food and perhaps some of the incidental travel. And I accept that. I accept that decision. I accept responsibility. The other was a trip to the commissioning of the USS Colorado. We had over 1,000 military personnel there. A lot of the officers from Washington and from the Pentagon came up, and I flew out on a plane that was commissioned by the founder of the foundation that was funding the ceremony and this important event for Colorado's future.
All right. So if I heard that correctly, take responsibility for the findings, but didn't hear an apology or anything about the fact that you are the first person to be held in contempt by them for refusing a subpoena. I want to ask Mr. Romanoff on this. You suggested that nominating Mr. Hickenlooper jeopardizes Democrats' chances to take this seat from Republican Senator Cory Gardner because of those ethics issues. Is that because you think these are serious ethics issues, or do you just think it's an easy attack for Republicans?
It is both. Look, John Hickenlooper just wrote the Republicans' ad against him twice now. First, when he told everybody in the state he'd be a terrible senator and didn't want the job. I happen to believe him. And now, when he breaks the law, refuses to apologize, defies a subpoena, and becomes, as you said, Kyle, the first person ever held in contempt by an independent ethics commission. You heard John blame the Republicans. You heard him blame the staff. I suppose he even blames the commission, which includes his own appointees who ruled against him. The truth is, John Hickenlooper represents a threat that we cannot afford. I believe he should consider withdrawing from this race.
Mr. Hickenlooper, would you like to respond to that? Your opponent just called for you to withdraw.
Well, the point I was trying to make is that these allegations were waged by a dark money Republican group, and they're going to lay attacks and millions of dollars of smear ads against whoever the Democratic candidate is. And you know, I've campaigned statewide in 2010, 2014, difficult years for Democrats, and won both times. And Andrew, you haven't won an election, in 12 years. I think it's clear that I have a relationship with Coloradans through thick and thin, and that they're going to recognize these as smear attacks that will be used against any Democratic candidate, no matter what their background.